Oh, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones with SP History, and we are on to episode 13 of the Malcolm X series. As you can see, if you've been following my series, I just got a haircut. My wife is upset because I got too much cut off the sides. She hates it when I get my hair cut too short. Well, it is what it is. Anyway, we have reached episode 13. This is the FBI cover-up, and it's circumstantial evidence to be sure when you try to link the agency that's doing all the covering up with the assassination itself, if that's all you got. And of course, we do have more than just the circumstantial evidence of the cover up, but I have discovered that in the two Kennedy cases, it was the CIA who did most of the covering up, some FBI contributions to that as well. And then in the MLK, Fred Hampton, and Malcolm X cases, it was the FBI. And isn't it interesting that the evidence points to the CIA taking out both Kennedys? Why are we surprised the CIA would be so involved in the cover-up? Isn't it interesting that the FBI is, according to the evidence, mostly responsible for the targeted killings, the COINTELPRO operations that targeted civil rights leaders like Fred Hampton, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X for assassination? Why are we surprised that the FBI is involved in the cover-up? It's been my experience you don't cover up if you have nothing to hide. And so that's where we are today. And I will quick scroll through my sources. By the way, I've been receiving lots of additional source material, which I will be going through after this series is concluded. And uh, if I find a lot of additional material that I think can add an addendum to the material that I have provided, I will add a 15th episode. And this will be from the source material provided by you, the listeners, and your contribution. So just give me some time to get through that. I've got to go through these videos and look up these people and check out some of their resource material and then cross-check it with what I have found and what I've already presented, and then determine if it's worth another episode. So let's talk about the cover-up. Let's talk about the FBI record versus the court record, because we've already learned that the district attorney was not presented with certain witnesses and certain evidence that would have been exculpatory towards Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson. And they languished in a prison cell for a lot of years because of that FBI malfeasance. And it was intentional. They wanted those two to go to prison. They wanted the investigation to get tied off at those three rather than any look at Newark, which we talked about yesterday, Newark. This information all comes out because FBI records or FBI documents were released. Now, this was not because the FBI willingly released these. We learned yesterday it was a result of court battles and congressional action that forced the release of these documents. These documents were prepared during the investigation. So everything we're going to talk about today, the FBI knew before the trials happened. The FBI knew immediately in the aftermath. This was a result of their investigation. This isn't something that happened 20 years later. This is something that they knew immediately. David Garrell, I've quoted him before. He's the expert in FBI, COINTELPRO, and all things FBI, really. He said, quote, based on FBI documents, it's very clear that they, the FBI, got a reasonably good description of the gunman who wielded the shotgun. It's clearly based on Bureau agents. Remember, they had 9 informants. They also had 2 agents, at least 2 agents that we know of, in the ballroom that day. So they have at least 11 people of their own. So he says it's clearly based on Bureau agents, probably the 9 FBI informants who were inside the Audubon ballroom that day. It's a very detailed accounting. And he lists it here. He says, quote, he is a Negro male, age 28, 6'2", 200 pounds, heavy build, dark complexion, wearing a gray coat and believed to be the assailant who used the shotgun. Of course, the autopsy report, which obviously they're going to have access to, said that it was the shotgun that killed him. So this is the guy who killed Malcolm X. And they have a detailed report of him. Uh, and of course, the guy that they arrested and said was Shotgun Man was Johnson, Thomas Johnson, or Khalil Islam, his Muslim name. He's a very light-skinned African American. He's thin-built, right? And wasn't wearing an over. Well, there was no evidence that he was even there. In fact, he had an alibi that he wasn't there. No record of whether or not he was wearing a coat or not. But this the man that they arrested instead of Shotgun Man clearly didn't fit their own description. And because the FBI didn't release this report in 1965 to the public, it took years and years, it took decades for this report to be released. No New York prosecutor ever saw this description. So the DA, whom the FBI is saying, hey, we've got you the guy, his name is Johnson, he's Shotgun Man, prosecuted Johnson without knowing that he did not even fit the description, the physical description of the assailant. And of course, the FBI knew it. They didn't fit the description, but they withheld that document from the DA, from the public, and allowed an innocent man to be convicted. The According to Tony Bauza, we've talked about Tony Bauza a lot. He's the NYPD detective, worked with Bossie, which is doing the bidding of the FBI. He said, getting information from the FBI was always difficult for us, always. They played at compliance. They were very pleasant, but they wouldn't give us anything. The FBI had a fellow who was there every single day, every day going through our files and reports and giving them to his superiors. It was strictly a one-way street. There was not any sharing. Sharing implies give and take. This was all take and no give. So this evidence that the FBI compiled in the aftermath of the shooting was not shared with the NYPD, wasn't shared with Bossie, it wasn't shared with the district attorney, it wasn't shared with anybody. And that was standard operating procedures. This is how it was. And of course, in this case, as you're going to see as we proceed through this, they're acting on orders from on high. J. Edgar Hoover. Leon Amir, pictured here in the red circle, standing next to Malcolm X. There was I'm going to introduce you to him. He was according to Wesley Muhammad, who, by the way, Wesley Muhammad was introduced to me yesterday in a comment section of the YouTube video by a listener as a very good source. So I'm going to be checking out Wesley Muhammad. Anyway, this is his quote or information that he put together talking about Leon Amir, who in his view is a highly respected source and a former member of the nation, and now he's a leader in Malcolm X's new organization. So what Leon Amir is, it's kind of he's one of the very few that followed Malcolm X from the Nation of Islam over to his new organization, OAAU. So he was loyal to Malcolm X, is what he's saying. And Freedom of Information request by Abdurrahman Muhammad turned up a file that had another reference to the shotgun assassin. This is another FBI file from another source, and the source is Leon Amir. You said, well, where was Leon Amir on this day? You can see he's bottom picture on the left. He's at the funeral of Malcolm X there. So this is afterwards. Prior to that, you can see him. He's always in the company of Malcolm X. Malcolm X's new organization was fledgling. It was just beginning. It was just starting. It was small. And any followers that were loyal enough to come over from the Nation of Islam to the OAAU with Malcolm X are going to be part of his inner circle. Leon Amir, there were literally dozens of pictures of Leon Amir in the company of Malcolm X in the days before he died. And he was recognized as a top leader in that organization. He ends up, by the way, well, I'll get to that in a minute. I want to get ahead of myself. Anyway, according to Amir, who was renamed Muhammad, At Malcolm X's funeral, he was told explicitly by former members of the Newark, New Jersey Mosque, number 25, one we talked about yesterday, that the man wielding the shotgun was tall, dark-skinned, and that he shot from the hip like he was an expert with this type of weapon. And according to Amir slash Muhammad, the shotgun assassin was a lieutenant in the Newark Mosque, number 25. And of course, this corroborates what the other eyewitnesses say. This also corroborates what Hagen slash Aziz had said when including amongst his four assailant accomplices the name of William X, saying that they all came from the Newark Mosque. And of course, William X was determined by the FBI files and the autopsy report to be William Bradley. And William Bradley was, through a lucky break, was determined to be Mustafa Shabazz. And so it, this all this information corroborates each other, basically. He was a top leader, Leon Amir, in Malcolm X's OAAU, died under suspicious circumstances after informing the FBI and others that his life was in danger and that he knew who killed Malcolm X. Stop me if you've heard this before. Suspicious death. He was quoted as saying, "I have facts in my possession as to who really killed Malcolm X." And referring to the Chicago headquarters of the Nation of Islam, he said, "The killers aren't from Chicago. They're from Washington." And he had met with the FBI days earlier, and despite being in good health and a martial arts expert, he was found dead at the age of 32. And afterwards, the coroner changed his autopsy report multiple times. So this is a very key witness that nobody knows about, that was close to Malcolm X, had information he went to the FBI with that countered clearly the narrative, which of course the government narrative was that the killers were Nation of Islam and motivated by a jealous hatred of Malcolm X, whatever. And that the government had no part in it whatsoever. And he's saying now, not only did the government have a part in it, the killers are actually from Washington. And he went to the FBI with this information. And days later, he ends up dead. So, and of course, he was the one. Another big chunk of his information was important is that he pointed the finger at the Newark Mosque. Remember now, the FBI wants no investigation of anything related to Newark. This is why they railroaded Thomas Johnson, Norman Butler. This is why they said the killers came from Mosque number 7 in Harlem. This is why they said it was a Nation of Islam hit. It was all about containing it to Harlem, to the Nation of Islam, and to the 3 alleged gunmen. They wanted no part of the 5. They wanted no part of Newark. They certainly wanted no part of any information from any witness that steered anybody in the direction of Newark or Mosque number 25. Certainly not William Bradley. And the one witness who was a real problem, could have eventually been a real problem, bigger problem, was Leon Amir, because he was loyal to Malcolm X. And the fact that he went to the FBI with this information indicates he was not going to stay silent. And so he died days later. The FBI file on William X. Bradley said the following. In addition to his physical description, it said that he was an officer of Muhammad's Mosque number 25, which corroborates what Leon Amir has said, serving as a lieutenant of the Fruits of Islam. It included even a photograph of William Bradley, which one look at the photograph, and of course, they had plenty of photographic evidence of who William Bradley was, because remember, he had a long, pretty extensive criminal record. So it wouldn't be hard to pull up his photograph. The conclusion is that the FBI knew that Bradley, who was a lieutenant in Mosque number 25 in Newark, and that he fit the physical description of the assailant carrying the shotgun. And because they're possessing his picture, knew his identity and his description, and is even described in their own files as dark-skinned, stocky, and a lieutenant in the mosque, they knew about William Bradley before the investigation was concluded, before the trial of Thomas Johnson, whom they told the NYPD and the district attorney was Shotgun Man. They knew full well Thomas Johnson was not Shotgun Man. They knew full well that William Bradley fit the description of the assailant. And they went ahead with this perversion of justice anyway to keep the diversion going, to keep the patsies under the bright lights, so to speak. Um, in the event this information in the FBI file, it says explicitly, in the event this information is not already in the possession of the NYPD, such information should not be furnished to the NYPD without first receiving Bureau authority. And because since it never was, uh, the authority was never granted, that means it was never given. And the NYPD, what they're saying essentially is if the NYPD does not develop this evidence on their own, we're not going to give it to them. We're not going to help them. And it continues, quote, New York has not been advised of the identity of X, and the name is redacted, but we know who it is, William X. Bradley, as a possible suspect. And they kept that information to themselves. That's right in the FBI file. So it's clear that the FBI is protecting Newark, Mosque 25, and the four assailants who came from Mosque 25. Now, the one got arrested, and not much they can do about him because he got arrested on the scene. But the other four, they're protecting, and especially the one who fired the fatal shots, the shotgun man, William Bradley. None of this information is shared with NYPD. And the only reason we know about it now is because they were forced to give up these documents, and we found out literally 40, 50 years later. On August 31, 1965, this is still months before the trial began, which bled over into 66, these FBI leads were considered, according to the document, RUC, which literally means referred upon completion. In layman's terms, it means file is closed, meaning the court never had access to any of this information. They closed the file before the trial so that the DA never got access to it. Knowing Butler and Johnson were innocent. Months later, when the trials did happen, both of them were convicted. There was no physical evidence. The main assailant said they weren't involved. They had alibis. They weren't even on the scene. No witnesses saw them there. But on the FBI/NYPD say-so, they were convicted and sentenced to 20 years to life for Malcolm X's murder. Meanwhile, Bradley, his Muslim name Shabazz, was protected and went on to live a long life in Newark along with his other three assailants. Never investigated, never charged, never anything. So the question is, was Bradley or Shabazz, whichever name you want to go by, protected because he was an FBI informant? Was he one of these FBI informant? We know there were 9. They didn't identify him, but we know there were 9, according to FBI documents, according to the FBI personnel that put him there. Bauza, Jerry Fulcher, Arthur Fulton. In their words, there were 9, in addition to the 2 agents. So the question is, was Bradley one of these FBI informants, otherwise known as a provocateur? One of these guys who was working on behalf of the FBI that had to be protected, which is why the FBI closed the file before the trial and allowed 2 innocent men to pay the price. Jelani Cobb writes for the New Yorker. He's done a lot of research on this case. He says, I don't think there's a question of government complicity in Malcolm X's death. That the people who killed Malcolm X were affiliated with the Nation of Islam is not in question. I'm not disputing that either. But I think they were used. And I think he thinks so too. He says that the question, that the people who killed Malcolm X were affiliated with the Nation of Islam is not in question. How those flames were fanned, How those tensions were exacerbated or the role that the federal powers played in this, I think is substantial. I don't know how you proportionally break down the culpability, but I've always been somebody who looked at those questions as both and as opposed to either or. Well, that was a pretty good statement. Uh, I think what he's saying, simply put, is that yes, Nation of Islam, 5 members of the Nation of Islam from the Newark Mosque, number 25, killed Malcolm X, but they did not act on their own impulses. In fact, the leader of the Nation of Islam was on record, Elijah Muhammad, is saying, "Don't touch our brother. Give him some time. He doesn't know what he's doing. He'll come back to the fold." He's kind of treating him like a lost sheep. He was on record. And these people were dedicated and loyal soldiers of Elijah Muhammad. So what Jelani Cobb is saying is, I don't believe that they acted on their own. I think there's enough evidence to show federal complicity. In fact, more than that, the federals pushed buttons and they surveilled in their surveillance, their extensive surveillance of the Nation of Islam, of Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X. They realized all the tensions that were there, the pressure points, and they just applied pressure in the right places. They dropped information, whether it was misinformation or disinformation, to the right people. They pushed the right buttons. And then they aided in the post-assassination. They infiltrated, clearly, his bodyguards. They got 2 of his loyal bodyguards out of the way with a phony arrest. Then they infiltrated Audubon with all these informants and agents there. They kept NYPD away, right? They're supposed to have 24 agents there. They only had 2, and they were out of the room. And then in the investigation afterwards, anything that led to Newark and to William Bradley and to the Newark Mosque was tidied up by the FBI and kept out of the NYPD's reach. The file was closed, and they produced 2 patsies to stand in for their people, identifying one of them as the shotgun man, and then watched as 2 innocent men got sentenced to 20 years to life in prison, while the Newark people, specifically William Bradley, walked away scot-free. There has to be a motive. There has to be a reason they protected William Bradley and the other 3. They didn't hesitate to throw the others under the bus. So it wasn't because they were protecting, Nation of Islam or this. There's some motive, deeper and darker, more cynical, why they're protecting the Newark people and throwing the Harlem people under the bus, the Nation of Islam people under the bus. And what Jelani Cobb believes is that because they picked these 5 to be informants, they put them in that ballroom, and knowing that they're coming from a mosque, they picked the most hateful mosque towards Malcolm X in the country, led by James Shabazz. And he did nothing but stoke anti-Malcolm X sentiments amongst his followers. So that if you're going to pick a mosque to conduct a hit on Malcolm X, you go to Newark. And then all you have to do is provide the weapons and provide the post-assassination getaway, escape plan you can cover up. And when the federals are on your side, whenever there's an investigation, they have means by which, because they control all the levers of power, they control the legal system, they control the agencies that's doing the investigation, and then afterwards they can classify what they want and redact what they want and hide the documents for as long as they want. It takes decades to go back and retrace their steps. And by the time we learn the truth, 5 decades have gone by and nobody cares anymore. So, and when you put this in context with the other 4 assassinations that we've been discussing, 3 of which we've gone over in quite detail, JFK, RFK, MLK, when you put Malcolm X in the context of those 4, and I believe we'll find the same when we do Fred Hampton, you're going to see the same patterns, the same methods, which is why they fight so hard about the release of documents, because they're afraid people will figure out their methods. And they'd like to use them again. They used them over and over again in the 60s. They'd like to keep using them. I have grown in my appreciation for Malcolm X tremendously during this study. And I went into it, I don't know, pretty ambivalent. I was a little bit, uh, I really didn't know what I didn't know. I had been taught the stereotype of Malcolm X, which are basically his first two dispensations, an angry man trying to lash out against the system, first through a life of crime, which got him nowhere, and second, against the white man, which wasn't getting him anywhere really, as far as the larger cause. I knew nothing about the third dispensation of Malcolm X. I knew nothing about, I thought the reason he was assassinated is because hate begets hate, right? He got what was coming to him. I had no idea about the third dispensation and the fact that he was now forming a coalition with Africans around the world to fight for human rights, not just civil rights in America, that he was becoming an internationally known figure, that he was recognizing the root cause of civil rights problems, of inequalities and unequal justice and racism. And it was, in his view, capitalism, greed. And this idea that some people are fit, some people are unfit. It's okay to exploit the unfit for the purposes of the fit. And it's all motivated by greed, getting wealthy, getting power. And so he started to rail against the root cause, which was capitalism. And he started to become a proponent of socialist revolution and socialist revolutionaries. And he began to expose some of the hypocrisies of the American racial disharmony and all the things that we believed we were versus the things that we actually were. He was taking his case to the UN for a whole host of reasons. All of a sudden, he becomes a real threat. He's no longer just a firebrand rallying former prison inmates in the urban areas of America. Now he's rallying nation states around the world. And he's taking on, instead of the LAPD, now he's taking on the State Department and the White House and Congress. And so I just have so much respect for his sincerity of heart and his single-minded purpose, his purity and almost innocence. He didn't get waylaid by vices like sex and money, like his leader, Elijah Muhammad, did. He just had a single-minded purpose. And did he get it right all the time? No, who does? Was he uh, sometimes a little bit inflammatory? Of course. But it comes from a heart of passion for the cause. He was a true believer, which is why he was so disconsolate, he was so disillusioned after Ronald Stokes was killed and his organization, which had been preaching action, did nothing. And I think it was that moment, that was a seminal moment in his life that put him on a new course. Okay, if this organization I've built basically is not what I thought it was, it won't do what I thought it would do, then I'm going to have to go do it myself. And of course, it wasn't a choice that he made willingly. He sort of got forced out, but his best thing ever happened to him because it put him on a new path. He went to Mecca again. This time he has a second conversion. He starts meeting with all these foreign leaders and he starts finding his real purpose. And of course, the FBI is tailing behind, surveilling him every step of the way. And they start to see his circle getting bigger and bigger and bigger, including more people. Then he comes home, and another guy they've been surveilling, MLK, he starts to reach out to, and they merge. And this whole idea of a black messiah that J. Edgar Hoover was so concerned about uh, was coming to pass right in front of their eyes. This guy was uniting and bringing people into the brotherhood and forming coalitions and bringing people of disparate groups together. And that was a much bigger threat than when he was a firebrand. I have so much respect for that. He said, quote, and you think about the sacrifice he made. I mean, he died with basically penniless, homeless, jobless. He paid a huge price, a huge price. And it's one thing I agree with J. Edgar Hoover. He became a martyr for the cause. He was more important in his death than he was in his life, and he was pretty daggone important during his life. But they made a martyr out of him, which is the danger of assassination. This is why COINTELPRO would much prefer to discredit the leaders in the organizations, because then it discredits the whole movement. But when you make a martyr out of them, it actually adds credibility to the movement and to the person himself, the leader himself, which is why it's the option of last resort. You try everything first. If it gets to the point where you have to assassinate him, you've run out of bullets. No pun intended. Malcolm X said there's only one way to be independent. There's only one way to be free. It's not something someone gives to you. It's something you have to take. Nobody can give you independence. Nobody can give you freedom. Nobody can give you equality or justice or anything. If you're a man, you take it. If you can't take it, you don't deserve it. I think that's the key phrase in there. If you can't take your freedom or your independence or your equality or your justice, you don't deserve it. Nobody can give it to you. I'm for anybody who's for freedom. I'm for anybody who's for justice. I'm for anybody who's for equality. I'm not for anybody who tells me to sit around and wait for mine. I think that pretty much sums up Malcolm X. And I love this photograph of him. It shows a determination, that jaw. You can see the set jaw there. And then I think that's one of the reasons he became such an effective leader and speaker, because he spoke with passion. Well, a lot of people come out and speak with passion, but he had the conviction of his principles behind it. And everybody knew he was authentic. He was the real deal. Malcolm X was the real deal. You can't accuse Malcolm X of selling out to anybody. You can't accuse Malcolm X of compromise. You can't accuse him of falling prey to this vice or that. You cannot accuse him of being a false prophet. The man stood for, it's like that old saying, I think, how's it go? Well, I forget, but he was exactly as he appeared. There was no, uh, there was no pretenses. There were no pretenses, Malcolm X. So that's episode 13. Now, what I plan to do in episode 14 is to lay the victims side by side that we've discussed so far, JFK, MLK, RFK, and Malcolm X, show all the common themes, the reasons they each became threats in their own way to the system, and then look at what went down in each assassination, the methods that were used, and how they are so similar in each case. I did that in the MLK case, which of course that was just 3. Now we're adding a 4th. When we do Fred Hampton, we'll do a 5th. So that you can see we're coming back towards our thesis, my thesis, which is that the federal government was responsible for the death of these 5 individuals, all during the same time period, for the same reasons. And they used the same methods. So that'll be episode 14. As I described at the beginning, if we have an episode 15, it will be because of all the additional source material that I have received from the listeners. I want to go over that. It's going to take me some time. I want to go over that. And if there's enough information there to add to, as like an addendum to my series, which is episodes 1 through 14, I will produce an episode 15 with the material that you sent me. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.